millions on other health crises, but the fact that we have at least it's 30% of school-going kids have experienced sexual abuse in their lives. We then decided to move back to South Africa shortly after probably the most significant life-changing event for me, which was the fact that we discovered that my middle daughter is deaf. Something said to me, you must do this work now. There's something in it. And I knew I had to push myself out of my comfort zone. What are the things that enable us to flourish? Well, connection, belonging, relationships, self-worth, strong emotional intelligence. So, we could go on forever because all of that is linked into everything else.
Before we get started, everyone viewing, you'll see that we are in a slightly more professional studio setting. And I just want to thank Ocean Driven Media in Durban. They have set up their first video-first podcast studio in Durban. And this is such a great studio to come in and do your podcast episodes. What's nice about it is usually I'm the one who's setting up the camera and the audio and all of that for our podcast. But what's been really good is we've been able to just come in here and everything's done for you. So if you guys are interested in starting a podcast or want to start a podcast, or you have started your podcast and you're needing somewhere to film and record, Ocean Driven Media is your place to go. I think it's oceandrivenmedia.co.za. Information for all of that will also be in the description and the comments section of this video, of this episode. So go check it out. Cool. So, Deb, can you introduce yourself to our guests and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Thanks, Luke. So I am the CEO of an organization called DeafKidz International, and we are a charity. We're actually at the moment a UK registered charity, soon to be registered here in South Africa too. And our work is around the safeguarding of deaf children specifically. So very, very niche. Yeah.
Very niche. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you are based in Durban. You operate and work from here, and you travel to the UK from time to time.
Yeah.
And so DKI, DeafKidz International, is based in London. Is that correct? Or
yeah, we now that we're all in this whole remote working vibe, it's you don't really know where you're based anymore because everyone's based in their own place. But we were started in the UK, so our head office in theory is actually in Brighton, the cool city of Brighton in the UK. But we have an office set up in London. I am actually the first employee here in South Africa.
Wow.
But we've just hired somebody else there in Joburg. And we've also just had somebody come on board from Zambia. So our work is, even though we're a UK charity, our work takes place in low resource settings. So that is basically places like Africa, India, Pakistan, etc. And that's where most of our work happens. So it just makes sense for me to be based in Durban closer to the work. So our organization at the moment, I've only been in the role for 6 months, by the way. So my, an important role being based in South Africa is the beginning of kind of, I guess, a new era for us. We have great plans to grow and expand, and it just makes sense to do that in a context that's close to where the work actually happens. For so many different reasons, probably the most important reason being the understanding of context and cultures is so important in safeguarding work.
Especially with the deaf community.
Especially with the deaf community. Absolutely, yes.
Well, before we get there, maybe we could spend a little while just taking us on your journey, because you've just come into this about 6 months ago.
Yes.
Taken the position that was offered to you. Can you tell us about your story leading up to that? So I know you lived and worked in the UK for many years. And then you guys relocated back here. So can you tell us a little bit about maybe a 30,000 view story about that? And then we can talk about why you chose to do what you're doing now and what brings such fulfillment to you.
My gosh, I could spend so long talking about my journey, which has been an incredible journey. I actually started life as a young adult, did a BCom and the marketing honors, and thinking that, I'm going to be the next director of Unilever or whatever it was. And then actually I spent quite a few years traveling, 3 years traveling, living and working in the UK, but properly backpacking around different countries. And I guess it was through those experiences that I realized that that aspiration was actually not ambitious at all. I really became a lot more focused about being intentional and purposeful in my life and what I do and how I do it. And from that moment in my young 20s, I really wanted to contribute something. But it took me, I turned 50 this year, it took me those 25 years to actually get to the point where I feel like I actually have a job that was designed for me for many different reasons. It fits in exactly with, it just feels like absolute purpose for me. I spent 15 years in London in the investment banking sector. Why was I there? Because I realized that I needed a job. And if it wasn't going to be a purposeful job, it was going to be a job where I was going to earn as much money as I could. So it was like, yeah, that's the place. I remember days in London, I used to go to the library and study up on finance and investments and all of that stuff so that I could be put in a job where I could earn as much as I could, because I always recognized that I was a wage slave. So you're trading time for money all the time. A lot of fulfillment came from relationships in the workplace and the people I met, and also my own journey of self-growth, which I've been on for 30 years. And but yeah, it did take me that long. We then decided to move back to South Africa. Shortly after probably the most significant life-changing event for me, which was the fact that we discovered that my middle daughter is deaf. She was 2.5 at the time, and now she's 12. But it was shortly after that we all moved, my husband and myself and our 3 girls, who were very young at the time, back to South Africa. And I thought, maybe now I'll find the purpose, the job, the job and the purpose. And my life was always happy, but there was something. I just knew that there was something more for me.
Yeah.
And I remember a specific moment. I worked in IT for some time because, you got to pay the bills. And I remember the specific moment when I was on the balcony outside work, and I got a phone call from a lady at Wits University, and she offered me a job in the nonprofit sector, working on an early childhood development program, actually doing business development for them. It was a program called High Hopes, which is run out of the Centre for Deaf Studies, and she offered me this job. And I stood there and I was like, hyperventilating, because the salary was so much lower than what I was on. But I remember thinking that I knew that I had to jump now. I had to jump. And I had this vision in my mind of me jumping off this balcony. And I was like, I'm doing it. I don't care. It felt right. And yeah, I remember that so specifically. And that was actually probably about 4 years ago that happened. And since then, it was a bit of a hustle. A big hustle, actually, because I also co-founded an organization called Thrive, and we offer parent support to parents of deaf children. But I worked for Thrive and I worked for High Hopes, but I was hustling day to day, and I almost gave up. And I almost thought, I'm just going to have to go back to corporate work. This hustle is too much. I've got the kids, etc. And then I literally got a call last November from the chairperson of DeafKidz International to say, would you apply for the CEO position? And at the time I was like, no, I'm over it. I'm over being out of my comfort zone. My whole life I've pushed myself to be out of my comfort zone. And it's just turned into, for the first time, and it took me to 50 to get here, I'm not an imposter. All those years in finance, I was an imposter. I got paid so well. my bosses thought I was doing amazingly, and I was loving it, enjoying life, and we had having a good time. But there was that gap, and I was always the imposter. I am now not an imposter. I'm the best person in the world to do this job.
That's awesome.
So the confidence, the purpose, everything has just come together. And I always think of this analogy. They say in childbirth, if you're going through natural childbirth, they say in that moment where you feel like you can't go on, that's when the baby's coming. The baby's going to be born.
Okay.
And that's what happened to me. And
awesome.
I see that so often in real life, just when you think, I'm done with it, I can't go on, I've been pushing too hard, whatever the story is, that's when you're actually on the cusp of a breakthrough.
That's awesome.
And I always knew that and I recognized it, but I will just say one thing, as soon as we're on the topic, that, it did take me all those years to find this amazing job of purpose where I just understand it so well. I understand the context, I understand the kids we're working with. I know this is my reason. This is the work I was always designed to do. But I seized so many small opportunities along the way to get me here.
Okay.
I didn't just wake up and say, the Steve Crump, the CEO from DeafKidz International, is phoning me and asking me. I remember, now that I look back to all the moments, my own path of self-development, which has always been something that I've done. I've always tried to figure out how can I flourish? How can my kids flourish? What is it about human nature that enables us to flourish? What are those things? What's the silver bullet? I was always inquiring about this, also doing self-work around trying to, understand my own story of not enoughness, which obviously every person on the planet has in some way. And but I seized small opportunities everywhere. And I look back now and I look at times when I threw myself so wildly out of my comfort zone. I remember once I was asked to do a presentation at a conference as the mother of a deaf child. That was my title. I'm the mother of a deaf child. Now I'm co-presenting with a professor of social work for deaf people from the University of Manchester. And I was like, are you kidding me? So I remember my mother babysat many weekends. I researched, and I didn't want to do it actually, but something said to me, you must do this work now. There's something in it. And I knew I had to push myself out of my comfort zone, but I didn't have to. I could have said, no, actually, I'll just sit in the conference and watch somebody else present.
Yeah, that's good.
So pushing, and I look back now and I'm like, gosh, what I learned in all those Saturdays when my mom was babysitting has stood me in the greatest stead right now in my job, because I can talk with amazing confidence about safeguarding and deaf children specifically.
Awesome.
I possibly, anyway, I don't want to.
No, that's great.
That's a short version of my story, yeah.
And I can see just the passion just comes out of you when you talk about it. So what I find very intriguing about that is when we're growing up and we leave school and we're told, pursue your dreams and pursue your purpose. And I've just turned 37, so I'm not quite 50 yet. Got some catching up to do. But
before you know it.
What I'm realizing is that as we I don't think we can truly find our purpose sorry for all you 18-year-olds.
I know, I also feel like saying sorry.
I really don't.
Yeah,
this is my opinion. And just what experience tells me is you can't find your purpose when you don't understand yourself first. And you can only understand yourself first through running in the trenches.
Absolutely.
So this whole notion of, and I'm so for it, let's pursue what we love, let's pursue our purpose, let's pursue our passion. Maybe it's got more to do with passions than purpose when you're younger.
Yeah.
And maybe there's no one way to approach this thing.
No, there isn't.
So, I mean, in your case, you knew that you didn't fit into the space. You knew that you hated it, but you still did it, and you did it the best that you could.
I did it the best I could.
Did you find that helped you and set you up for success later on in life? And in what ways do you think that helped you?
I read something yesterday on Facebook. It was the story that's been going around social media about, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a little girl, an advert with the bread. Anyway, I won't go, it'll take me a while to explain it, but it was a story about this, her uncle was a photographer, and he just loved taking photos, and he took photos to the best of his ability, and he once, he took these photos of this little girl's Albany bread, the most beautiful little girl with this bread, and somehow that got into the hands of Albany, who, anyway, the little girl and him are now famous. Why? Not because he phoned Albany or phoned anyone and said, he just did what he loved. And I actually wrote the quote, the saying down, because this is what it said on the post. These are not my words. It says, do what you do well, and when it is your time, grace will find you.
That's awesome.
And that is just my life, actually. But it helped me. Every single experience I have had, even those days where I was running spreadsheets and working at 11 o'clock at night in the middle of London, trying to get reports in because it was financial year end, et cetera, every one of those experiences has been something which has contributed towards what I'm able to do now in my job.
Yeah.
And I have to say, whilst I didn't fit, I did everything to the best of my ability. And of course, every now and again, you're going to have an off day. My work ethic was always there. And I knew, Steve Crump didn't phone me. I was not lying on my bed. It was, they say that opportunities in life, there's never just one opportunity that is going to land in your lap. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's a combination of seizing small opportunities and the small decisions that you make every day, not that one decision. No one's going to come and offer you what you want. You are showing the universe that I'm there. I'm ready.
Yeah, it's
I'm
pitching
ready.
up every day.
It's showing up for yourself. That cliche. It's showing up for yourself every day. That's when the grace comes in. And I don't think there's any bit of my life, or especially once my working career started, that I could have omitted to actually realize where I am now.
So are you saying that out of the 25 years that you were
a wage slave,
I love that saying, that you were a wage slave.
Yeah.
Another friend of mine would say that you worked for Pharaoh.
Absolutely, yeah.
So out of those 25 years, would you say that it was a waste? Or
no.
Okay.
It was essential.
Yeah.
It was essential. So it's. I didn't even know we'd be talking about this today.
So the reason
yes, it was essential.
The reason I'm asking this is because for our listeners and our viewers, there's a lot of. I know starting a business, and this is part of what I do, is I help people unpack what their purpose is. But I don't think that you can do that unless some light comes down from heaven and angel sits on your shoulder and you have this, this Red Sea splits, and even then you're going to be questioning yourself.
Of course.
But for the guys who are in the trenches, and for the guys who are running their businesses and trying this, and maybe their business gets shut down and they got to go find another job, what would you say to those guys how would you encourage them?
I mean, I would just say what we've said is that you have to go through that. It's essential because every single one of those moments is building you for something. And it's especially the moments that are the most difficult.
Yeah.
It's a cliche, you learn through your mistakes, you only learn through making mistakes, but it's just so true. I had, for me, the moment in my life when I discovered that Sarah was deaf, which in those, in those 2 weeks of my life after that diagnosis, where we were so lost, so overwhelmed, didn't have language to communicate with her. It felt like dire straits. It felt like the child I had died. In that moment when we had received this news.
The child you knew.
The child, it felt like the child we knew had died, because I thought she could hear, now she can't hear. So this is a different child.
Yeah.
But of course, that was just in that moment, in those moments. But it was, the grief was very real. But that is that's turned out to be the best thing that's ever happened to me.
That's amazing.
The people I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for, well, hopefully it would have been something else then, but there was just the most incredible blessings in that moment that, and I'm not all parents experience it this way. Just, I would certainly like to say that, but for me, and even for her, she's amazing. I think, she's just got typical 12-year-old problems, but there are also other things so I'm not saying any of it is perfect, but that was essential. That thing that I could have been swept in the grief of that all forever in my life, it just turned out to be essential to, all of those experiences are essential to build you.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you think that moment, which was quite a defining moment for not just you, but for your whole family. So do you think that moment made you, or do you think you took that moment and made a meal of it?
No, I took the moment and made a meal of
So
it.
maybe to rephrase that
A meal.
is, did you take that opportunity, and I think it's all it's our mindset, and you could have just say, woe is me,
Absolutely.
and just slump back on the couch and scroll through Facebook.
I could have, yeah.
Or maybe...
And I probably had a few days when I did that.
Probably,
saying.
yeah. Okay. So, but you took that as an opportunity also.
Yeah.
And you made it work.
Absolutely. And I think what really helped me there, though, is all the kind of work. I just have had a very inquiring mind around this concept of flourishing as humans. So I think all the work that I had done, the reading, and just out of interest, I'd done a few courses. I'd just, I'd been in that space. It was all of that work that I had done that enabled me, after my 2 weeks of grief, to say, right, what have I got here? Okay. Because I'm also a firm believer that you never deny your feelings. You don't just pull yourself together and say, right, I'm getting on with it. You allow the feelings to be. That's probably one of the most important things in the world that we can do. But I said, right, okay, what is it that I can do to make this child the best she can be? That was my thought. Okay, right, I'm going for this. And then I was like, gosh, everything that I know deep inside of me, what are the things that enable us to flourish? Well, connection. I know you love this topic. I love it too, with all my heart. Connection, belonging, relationships, self-worth, strong emotional intelligence. Those would probably be the top of, we could go on forever, because all of that is linked into everything else. So I knew. So I was like, right, I need to raise this child. The fact that right now I actually can't communicate with her, right? Okay, we're going to have to look beyond that. And how am I going to connect with her? How am I going to let her know that she is worthy of love and belonging, that she is everything that any child is, and she's deaf? The problem is that why that's more difficult than with any other child is because the context that she's in, and this is for every deaf child, but especially for deaf children in a setting like ours, in low-resource settings, there's so much stigma associated with disability, whatever it is, deafness just being one of those, that she will always live in a world where everybody else, indirectly or directly, will be telling her that she's not enough.
Yeah.
She would be worth more if she could hear.
Yeah.
She actually doesn't really fit. And the world says that because the world is designed for hearing people, right? Not deaf people. Yeah. So now her whole, the typical experience of a deaf person is that they experience a huge amount of anxiety because they carry the whole burden of fitting into society. So they arrive at school and the burden is on them to understand what's going on, to read the lips, to figure out, to keep up. And it's so stressful. And the kid behind talks to them like, it's like, I didn't hear that. Now everyone's laughing. Why are they laughing? And then they just laugh, but they don't know what they're laughing at. It's a very stressful way of going through life. So I just, the context and the stigma and the way the world says you're not credible. The world says, society says you're worthless. So I was like, okay, that's the context. But what am I going to do to make sure that she doesn't carry that? And I have done it incredibly imperfectly, I will say, with all my kids. And actually, but what I realize is that's actually the way what I was always wanted, and the way I wanted to raise all my girls. Nothing changed, because I wanted to raise them with good self-worth. That was the most important thing. I wanted to raise them with a strong sense of connection to community, to us, to everything, to the world, to nature. And again, imperfectly done, but nothing was different. She was just deaf. So, yeah, if I didn't have all of that experience and hadn't looked into all of that and sat in that space, I wouldn't have had those tools to be able to say, right, this is fun, man.
Yeah.
This is fun.
So if you hadn't sat in your darkest moments and learned from that, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing today.
I would not be.
You'd probably still be a wage slave.
I would be a wage slave. For sure, I would be a wage slave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's transition from that into where you're at now. So you are performing in the role of a CEO for DeafKidz International.
Yes.
Of which I must say I've had the absolute privilege and honor of working with you guys. We filmed a documentary for your program you were doing in South Africa and Pakistan.
Yes.
Except we did the South Africa side.
You did yes. So that incredible filming you did for us,
It was amazing. It was such a great project.
Oh my gosh, that was the best.
Yeah.
That program is called DeafKidz Defenders.
Yes.
So when you this whole thing of safeguarding, it's actually on a spectrum. So I mean, and people don't when I say I do safeguarding for deaf children, people are like, just too much, because what is safeguarding?
What is that? Yeah.
So just to unpack that in a minute, safeguarding is it's more like a spectrum of things, and probably at the center of that, I would say, is protecting children from experiencing any type of abuse. So that would obviously be, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, online abuse, bullying, exploitation, and obviously the big one there would be trafficking and things like that. So what are the skills we can give children to help to protect themselves against experiencing any of those? We could spend days just talking about that. But then to me, I can never look at safeguarding just looking at that. Safeguarding is also just the well-being. So, and all those things that enable people and children to flourish. Because that, to me, if a child is, the protecting them from abuse is just making sure that they, I guess it's just ticking a box. But if you didn't give them all the other things they needed to flourish and they didn't experience abuse, they still wouldn't reach their potential. And then on the other side of the spectrum would be all the child protection things. So it's like if a child has experienced trauma or abuse, then there would be, it would be just the justice side of things, which we could spend days just talking about that too. What is justice and what is it for a child? But the judicial system, the legal system, as well as the social care system where they would experience counselling. But we at DeafKidz International, we focus very much on the protection side for now. There's always these other elements coming in. Yeah. But and the program that you worked with us on is one of our flagship programs called DeafKidz Defenders. And that's teaching deaf children specifically about, it's giving them tools and empowering them to better protect themselves. So you experienced some of the days when you did filming with us. The topics would be, the most simple things like, what is a trusted adult?
Yeah, which they don't understand. Some of them don't even understand what an adult is. Just giving language to that. Yeah.
So this is it, right? Yeah. And that the filming that you did for us, that program, that was a pilot. So we were piloting the DeafKidz Defenders, and you captured that beautifully. I don't know, there are very few people who've seen your film and not cried. So beautiful.
Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
It's so you start and my kids, I could just sit there and say to them, right, okay, this is what a trusted adult is. If something makes you feel unsafe, and this is how you would feel unsafe, well, you need to say no, you need to say stop, you need to stand up for yourself. Then you come and tell a trusted adult. Who are the trusted adults in your life? Well, blah, blah, blah. And, private parts. These are private parts of your body and blah, blah, blah. And, if you're online, I could, this is a secret. This is a surprise. This is the difference. This is where something's dangerous. This is when it's safe. I could give that all half an hour and the kids would be, cool, thanks, Mom. Can I go?
But with the deaf kids, you
can't.
But
with a deaf kid, you can't, because the language level, the language levels are generally very, very low. So you start and you say, right, trusted adults. And if you think about even the word trust, it's very difficult to explain to someone. If we didn't know what the word means and now we were trying to explain, it's quite difficult.
Yes.
But with a deaf child, it's a very abstract concept, this thing of trust.
Yeah.
So they don't understand what trust means. They don't understand if we said, how does it feel when you're feeling safe? We had to start from there. And then, as you experienced and saw yourself when you were filming for us, what is an adult?
Yeah.
So the vocab and the language deprivation for those kids, and again, that could be a whole other podcast around why the language levels are so low, because the children have experienced language deprivation. It's really hard to teach these kids. So we designed a program which has it's a combination of teaching, but it also has amazing animations.
Like a little computer game?
Yes, and then a computer game. So it's a combination of the game the kids play. And you and I chatted about this. Just so how amazing this, firstly, it's something that the kids, for the first time, a deaf child has had something designed specifically for them.
Yeah.
It wasn't designed for a hearing child, and then they had to fit into it and adapt and, okay, what's going on here? It was designed for them. And we could see the results even when we did we did evaluations of the whole program, how much their knowledge increased, how much they grew, how empowered they actually were after that program, because it was designed for them. It was visual. It was. You didn't need a lot of language to understand it. And then, of course, they play this little web-based computer game linked to the theme. And this was just made these kids so happy. And what happens when you're happy? You're open and you can learn. So they were safe and they were happy. And therefore, when we wanted to teach them different concepts, they were lapping it up and they were ready because they were happy. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't happen often in a school environment, especially for a deaf child. Again, could spend days on this one. But, so DeafKidz Defenders is our main flagship program, and it's just designed to teach deaf children basic skills around how to keep themselves a little bit safe.
Yeah, and what I found interesting from that program too is that could be obviously it was designed for the deaf kids and the deaf community, but there are some very fundamental truths and fundamental basic human truths in there that should be taught to every child.
Absolutely.
I would say most children don't understand any of that stuff, and they're hearing.
Absolutely.
And I still think it is an incredibly powerful program, and it was such an honor to be a part of that. So you've got your pilot program. Is that rolling out?
Yeah. So
are you rolling that out more? Or?
Yes. So we did a pilot for that in both South Africa and Pakistan. And interestingly, I wasn't with the I wasn't actually, when you filmed for us, I was not actually working for DeafKidz International at the time. I was working for Thrive, and we were the implementing partners. But I got to actually myself roll out that program in a number of schools here in KZN. We taught, I think it was around just slightly over 300 deaf children in deaf schools. Awesome. And so amazingly, and I think partly due to your amazing video material that you produced for us, we actually got more funding.
Awesome.
So another huge amount, which is just so great to roll out the program now in South Africa. So we're now going to Gauteng, Western Cape, and also in Zambia, which is a new geography for us, and further in Pakistan.
Okay.
So obviously the idea is, we want every deaf kid to have this. We want every kid to have this program. And as you say, it's so simple. And people parents who are completely vested in their children, those kids still don't know all this stuff, these basic things.
Yeah.
And even the safety thing. Well, how does it feel how do you know you're not safe? How does it feel in your body? All of those. It's so critical for kids to know that, but nobody actually teaches that to them. And especially with this whole online world now, I mean, I think that's, it's crazy how vulnerable children are on online platforms where, nobody will let their kid, their 4-year-old kid loose, or a 6-year-old kid, or even a 10-year-old kid loose in the pavilion on their own because they're scared they might get snatched, they might get this, whatever, they lost, whatever, this could happen, that could happen. But they'll let their kid loose with a phone, which is the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're there with strangers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even though you're restricting, it's still, there's just so many, that could be a whole other podcast.
It could be. Should do a whole series.
A whole series.
Exactly. Yeah. So you guys are rolling out this program now and doing all these projects, and you're fulfilling this role as CEO at DeafKidz International. There's so many questions I could ask here.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But, in line of, let's put it back to the business space. I've been involved in the NGO space for many years. I used to work in that space, and I understand that any successful NGO or MPO needs to be run like a business.
Yeah.
Same principles.
Yeah.
So how have you, taking your skills and everything you've learned in the past, now you've entered the space of CEO of an organization that's not necessarily for profit, but how have you found that integration into that and just figuring out how that space works? Do the business principles that you learned apply to that? Maybe you can talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, they do. Very much, in my opinion. And because, there are so many organizations out there who are doing good work on paper, not profits. They're receiving funding, and you can write reports around amazing stuff that you do. But what's really measuring you? In business, what's measuring you is your profits. Are you actually still in business? I mean, it's so clear. Whether in non-profit, it's you measure through social return on investment. So it's not standard return on investment, it's social return on investment, but that's actually incredibly difficult to measure. So I believe that there are many organizations out there who they don't even realize themselves that they, I don't want to say not doing a good job, because I'm not saying that because I think that their hearts are in it for sure, but they're not making the impact that they think they're making or that they intended to make. It's very hard to impact this space.
Huge.
Another podcast. It's very hard to impact the space because it's so complicated. So especially if you're dealing with, I think any person who's a beneficiary of a nonprofit is a vulnerable person. And vulnerable person, people live in a context of poverty, lack of support, lack of parental care, things like that. And it's very, very hard to navigate those things. But I know the brand of DKI, under my leadership, number one, we will be authentic. And what I mean by that is that we will be very transparent about where we are and are not having impact. Mm-hmm. And this I know from business. Like you can't run a business without having markers and clear deliverables, and you can't just be doing the work and thinking, no, it must, because in our brains we're like, surely if we teach a child about safeguarding and that they can say no, well then of course they're going to be more empowered and that's going to protect them. Well, actually, you have to consider the entire economic context that child is in, and maybe there are a million questions around that. So we can't just say, yes, we taught the child, tick, we've done the job. We have to constantly, are we in that context within which the child is in, making impact? And that is what we're all about. And it's quite rare, actually, in a nonprofit that people question themselves so much. And again, it's the mindset of being willing to say, we didn't have it quite right, or we're only making this much impact. And you can push out the stats in any way you want to make them sound amazing,
Because everyone believes a good stat.
Everyone believes a good stat, but they don't put it in context. So the knowledge, so one of our stats, and I mean, you know how much I believe in our program, but still I question. And I'm like, okay, so one of the results from our monitoring and evaluation, we did a very intense survey, and it came out that children's knowledge, or children are have 98% increased knowledge around, how does it read? It says they have 98% more likely to recognize abuse, say stop.
Awesome.
And, all of that. It's awesome. It is, and I believe with all my heart we've made a great impact. But people see 98%, but actually my question still remains, but what if they were faced with the situation? Would they be able to act? How do you measure that? Because you don't want to traumatize kids and put them in those situations. But those are my questions. I need to know that. I'm not happy just to say, well, in theory, they can regurgitate the information. We need to take it further.
So how do you measure the success of a program that you're running?
So at what we do at the moment, and the new funding that we've received, a huge part of it is around monitoring and evaluation. And the funder is very, very, we have two main funders, and both of them are very much, thankfully, into things like monitoring and evaluation impact. So you would monitor, and they've got experts that we're working with to set up in a monitoring and evaluation program for our program. So, of course, you would do things like surveys before and after with the kids. You would do, within the program, you would do surveys, you would do questionnaires. For me, the greatest one is an observation, because then you can really tell so much more about what they're actually understanding and what they're not. Worksheets, talking to kids, interviewing parents, interviewing teachers, surveys for teachers, surveys for parents, all of that type of mix to come up with a pack that then gives you certain stats. That's great for the program. What I want to do is longitudinal studies. I mean, it's so tricky though. It requires a lot of funding, requires a lot of time. So now you're saying over the life, this kid was taught the program, this kid wasn't. Over the life of that child, were they protected through their life? Were their outcomes different to what they wouldn't have been? Or did they just have a nice day with us and they really enjoyed it when Luke came with his camera and that was the best day of their lives?
And they got a nice badge.
And they got a badge and a pencil case.
Yes.
Yes. And they loved it. I mean, how much those kids loved us when we came in and did the program.
So was it a lasting impact?
Was it a lasting impact? And again, this is why we don't work with just the kids. We work with the parents and we work with the teachers and we work with the schools. What do we actually essentially want to do? We want the world to value the safety of a child. We want the world, which is, that kid is born with all the rights in the world. And I'm not even talking about constitutions and the Bill of Rights and the UN, blah, blah, blah. I'm talking about their God-given rights to be protected and to flourish. And every kid is born with that. Yeah. And somehow, as a society, even in developed contexts, somehow we don't value that. And for me, what's the answer? Well, it's to change the culture of safeguarding around that child and in the world, in the schools. This is a priority. Our kids need to be safe. Whereas we're prepared to spend millions on other health crises, but the fact that we have, I don't want to state, I know we've got at least statistically a prevalence study has shown that at least it's 30% of school-going kids have experienced sexual abuse in their lives. My study, my PhD, I've done in my head. I've done many PhDs in my head.
We all have our own PhDs. I got a PhD. I've got a few of those under my belt.
You got, yeah. That PhD I did. I would say for a deaf child, it's, you're looking at 70%. How can we be in a position where justice has been so, not served? How can we have all let that happen? So these are the questions in this role that go on in my head all the time, because what's the silver bullet? We know there's no silver bullet, but what is it that a child needs to be protected? A small part of that is the DeafKidz Defenders program, yes, but
there's a much bigger.
It's bigger, and that's for me the brand of DeafKidz International. I want to grow to be. We will always be truthful about what our results really are. We will always be learning, and we will not be afraid to say we didn't get it quite right. And luckily we backed our funders, we backed our board of directors, the chairperson, the board that I report to, and our funders, incredible funders. They're happy for that. They're happy for us to not get it quite right and to learn and grow through all of that. So it's almost like this is now a whole another replica of the previous 30 years of my whole life.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Debs, that is amazing. And
amazing, yeah.
I think what you're doing and what you're about is awesome. And I absolutely love the impact that you guys are making in the world and in the community around us and in the Durban community. I mean, being a part of the program last year was just seeing how you're impacting the community in Durban. It's absolutely amazing. And I loved every moment.
I know. I often think back to that. We had a few days together. It was just so much.
It was just
lovely.
Even just seeing the impact you had on the kids and the schools and the context. And I think, yes, this isn't DeafKidz International is not strictly a business.
No.
But it's run like a business. The principles are the same. And I think your story is very inspiring and hopefully encouraging to our viewers and to our listeners.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time.
Such a pleasure.
And maybe we'll have you on for some more stories.
There's so much. I mean, we didn't even talk about the EQ.
I know, there's so
all the
much
emotions.
to talk about. Thank you.
Yeah.
Could you maybe tell us where people can find you or DKI and see what you're about?
We are on all the socials, but we are DeafKidz International, one word, but the kids is spelled with a Z, so it's Deaf KIDZ.
Oh, the cool kids.
The cool kids, yeah.
Cool kids.
International as one, and we are .org, so DeafKidz International with the Z.org, and then also on all the socials.
And so I will put those into the description.
Yes,
and
thank you.
Then there's also, you're still involved with Thrive, are you?
I am still involved with Thrive.
Okay.
Oh my goodness, what's our website?
Well, I'll put that in. I'll put that in the description too. I think it's thrivezA dot something.
Yes, it's .org. There's an org or something.
I'll put it in the description. So that's just quickly on Thrive. You mentioned that is about empowering parents of deaf children and helping them cope in this massive thing.
Yeah, because we all know that a child who is championed is a successful child. The connections and the relationships and everything. Yeah. So we founded Thrive because I do believe actually the most important thing for any child is parental connection or that the championing of the child being championed by adults in their life. Gosh,
we could go for
I know. My gosh. So we founded that in recognition that if we can support parents to accept what has happened, and we had all been through similar journeys and got to this point of acceptance, and we wanted to support parents through all of that grief process and everything to come to a point to say, I'm going to champion my child because this will determine their success.
That's awesome.
So that's the work of Thrive, which is also just
so maybe one day we'll speak
entrenched in my
about Thrive.
heart.
There's a whole lot
another podcast.
whole lot of episodes ready. And
awesome.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Luke.
Viewers,
thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. And viewers, listeners, thank you for your time and thank you for your support. Thanks to Matt and the team from Ocean Driven Media for the use of this wonderful podcast studio space. and I will also have their stuff in the description. And go hit them up on social media, go check out their website, see what they're about. You can go and get your own podcast filmed and produced here. So go ahead, do it. And yeah, looking forward to chatting with you guys and having you listening into the next conversation. Peace.